Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, September 20th, 2021, and today we're going to be talking about Representative Anthony Gonzalez, who announcing that he will not be running for re-election in 2022, and how this adds to many Republican retirements ahead of the 2022 midterm elections, which questions whether or not 2022 will be this year in which the Democratic Party will suffer in the House, in the Senate, across the nation, in governorships, in state legislatures. This upcoming midterm election year is the first and biggest opportunity for the GOP to push back on President Biden, especially considering that his approval rating is now underwater. This point in time ultimately gives the GOP an opportunity to expand and gain the majority back in both the House and the Senate, as they did in 2014, retaining control of the House after flipping it in 2010 under President Obama's first term. Then in 2006, you also have it on the opposite side. Democrats flipped control of the House and the Senate in the same election year in that midterm year. So the Democratic Party is in this position where they are unpopular across the nation. They are not holding up to their numbers like they did in 2020 and 2018. And Joe Biden himself is unpopular. Everything seems to be working perfectly for the GOP. But one thing that jumps out and is a very, very good indicator about how a certain year will go is the number of retirements on either political party side. The fact is, as it stands today, Anthony Gonzalez adds to another one of the Republicans that are going to be retiring from the United States House of Representatives or United States Congress as a whole, which includes the Senate. Looking at the list here, based off of our 2022 map, we know that there are 5 Republicans who are retiring from public office in the United States Senate: Richard Burr, Pat Toomey, Rob Portman, Richard Shelby, and Roy Blunt. Richard Burr and Pat Toomey voted to convict President Trump in the 2021 conviction vote, the impeachment vote that was put forth towards the United States Senate. That's probably not why they are retiring. They announced that they were retiring well before then, but they pretty much are saying that they are no longer going to be running for re-election and therefore really do not have much to worry about. Amongst the House members here, 17 representatives are not seeking re-election in the United States House, and 7 are retiring from public office entirely. One, for instance, is 4 Democrats and 3 Republicans. But amongst the total number of representatives that simply aren't choosing to run for House, and they could do it for political reasons, it's not just because, they want to run for some other type of political office. Many people see a midterm election year that they would otherwise lose a House race as an opportunity to enter into a new type of race. For instance, Ron Kind has been floated as a potential Senate candidate for 2022. He says he's not going to run for anything in 2022. But there are Democrats out there that have chosen to retire and instead run for United States Senate or run for something else entirely. But looking here, the Democratic Party doesn't seem to have this heavy amount of retirements that you might expect. Once Ron Kind retired, it seemed to have been that point in time where Democrats could have started to see a very large amount of Democrats begin to retire, but that simply wasn't the case. What we see here with the Republicans is that they are counteracting and are matching the Democratic Party in the House of Representatives when it comes down to retirements. But in the Senate, it's a 5-0 lead for the Republican Party. They have 5 incumbents choosing to retire. In fact, the interesting thing is that every single Democratic incumbent in 2022 has already announced that they will be running for re-election, except for Patrick Leahy in the state of Vermont. And I don't think I need to remind you just how lopsided the state of Vermont is on the presidential level. Joe Biden won here by 35 percentage points. So when I see these announcements from Republicans across the nation that they are choosing to retire, I question whether or not they think 2022 will be a beneficial year for themselves. Many of them cite too much partisanship, or say things such as the political environment is so toxic, especially in their own party. That's a cop-out answer. It's the same one that has been given by politicians for very long periods of time. And while it may seem as if the Republican Party is in that time period where it's just different than it has been before with President Trump, with many other Republicans emulating him, it doesn't really matter. The playbook is the same. The strategy is the same. And the way that they are describing their retirement is the exact same that we've seen for long periods of time. And for Republicans to come out and say that they are retiring for this position, typically speaking, means something else. Whether they're worried about their own reelection bid, maybe they're worried about a primary, it doesn't really matter. This goes to show that there isn't this type of consolidation of Republican support, that there isn't this unity within the party that allows them to move forward and say, let's get over our own troubles and attack the Democratic Party. This tells us that the Republican Party, one, has infighting, which we can certainly see from the outside, but we know it now from a representative who's choosing to not run for re-election. 90% of incumbents win their re-election bids, especially in midterm years. You are looking at a year where Republicans could run up the margin without open seats. They could make it so the Democratic Party would have to play offense and defense, rather than them have to play defense when they're already in the minority. I mean, the Democratic Party is in a uniquely powerful position because they have a trifecta, and they've been throttled in many regards. But they also have the ability to retain such a trifecta, which would ultimately block the Republican Party for future elections. You could see the passing of DC statehood if Democrats expand their majority in the United States Senate, and then it would add 2 additional Democratic seats. And with those 2 new Democratic seats, you would start to see more and more Democratic legislation pass and make it more difficult. Let's say, for instance, they pass something dealing with voting rights, dealing with gerrymandering. So what happens then? Does it go to the Supreme Court and they rule that gerrymandering is now illegal, something that has been in place since the 1700s? A lot of things would happen if the Democratic Party was to, one, expand their majority, and that's why every single thing matters. Because looking at 2022, again, we have been fed into this idea that 2022 will undoubtedly be a red wave year. And I'm not going to deny. Right now, I do expect the Republican Party to win back both the Senate and the House. But I'm also seeing these Republicans retire, which makes me question, why are they retiring? And it should make you question the exact same thing. Because right now, they're at a high point. The GOP is in the most beneficial position they have been in for the past 6 to 7 months. Looking all the way back to the insurrection, they certainly have come a long way. And from a time period when Joe Biden was approved of by 20 points across the nation, now down 3 points across the nation, what a very tremendous swing. And for Republicans to choose now to retire means that something is up. Whether it's just Anthony Gonzalez being afraid of being primaried, it doesn't really matter, because he's not the only Republican who has decided to leave public office entirely or just choose to run for another office. With 5 Republicans in the Senate choosing to retire, nearly all of these races can and have been competitive in the past. North Carolina will be in this election. Pennsylvania will be. Ohio will be. Missouri could be, depending on the Republican nominee. Alabama probably won't be. In fact, certainly will not be competitive in 2022. But the fact that Republicans are leaving open races in very competitive states such as Ohio, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina is baffling. But it also tells you a lot about where the state of their party is right now. Because incumbents with a 90% survival rate don't just leave office for any reason. That's what I was saying earlier, talking about Anthony Gonzalez's reasoning, talking about partisanship and how it's too polarized within American politics. Well, you signed up for the job. You were elected under a time period in which we were just as polarized, maybe slightly less, but just because Donald Trump has entered into American politics doesn't mean that all of a sudden American politics is hard. American politics has always been cutthroat. It's always been in this position where everything is polarized, everything is politicized. And for me to see this as a reason as to why Republicans are choosing to leave, it doesn't make sense. They don't have control of the White House. They don't have control of the Senate. They don't have control of the House. The only thing that they need right now is to reclaim at least one of those chambers. And they can do it, but they can only do it with a unified party and with energy on their side. And when there's open races, that allows opportunities for Democrats to swoop in and make the races more competitive. And therefore, funding will go away from the candidates who need it most in those swing districts into these more solid Republican districts, but also open ones, and will be targeted by Democrats simply because they are open. Anytime there is a non-incumbent, it allows for change in overall voter sentiment. Democrats learned that in 2017. With all of those House vacancies, every single one of them shifted towards the left tremendously. Some of those districts shifted towards the left 15 to 20 points. For instance, Jon Ossoff, who is now a senator from the state of Georgia, in 2017 ran for Georgia's 6th district. Now, many Republicans boasted about the 4-point margin of victory for Karen Handel, about how Jon Ossoff blew a 20-point lead from the jungle primary to the final primary, but it doesn't really matter. Jon Ossoff ended up becoming a United States Senator, and it also is a point of interest that individual district was a district held by Newt Gingrich in the 1990s, who went on to be the Republican Speaker of the House and ran for president multiple times, and also was held by Tom Price, who resigned to become the Secretary of Health. But when he ran in 2016, before he was chosen by President Trump, he won in that district by 30 points. So open races absolutely involve surprisingly close elections, which is why this is very important. There also is something to point out that he is one of the few Republicans who voted to impeach President Trump. That's right, he is one of the 10 that ultimately decided that President Trump should not be in office anymore, or that his crimes that he committed in their eyes were enough to impeach him as President of the United States. Many Republicans are at the beck and call of voters because they run every 2 years. Senators, on the other hand, aren't so much. Only one of the senators who voted to convict President Trump is up for re-election in 2022 and will likely be running for re-election. And that is Senator Lisa Murkowski. But besides her, the rest have either already announced that they were retiring or just simply were not up in 2022, might be up in 2024, or potentially speaking, in 2026. These senators have a bit of time to completely change the way that the public views them, the way that they are perceived by the average Trump supporter, perceived by the average Republican. These House of Representatives members simply don't have the time. They are constantly running for re-election. The election occurs, the primaries are a year later, the general is 6 months later after that. It is always a political game. It is always a matter of whether or not this precinct will vote for me, whether or not I've lost this region, especially in these swing districts. But Anthony Gonzalez, to announce his retirement, tells us more than just the simple, we are polarized, more than the simple, Republican Party is in shambles. It tells us about how these Republicans view their own possibilities of being reelected. Because if Anthony Gonzalez thought he was going to win, he would not retire. The issue of polarization is not new, and politicians need to stop utilizing it as if it is a real reason as to why they are retiring. Incumbents also have seemed to retire in much higher rates in previous elections, and they were in many senses indicators of what was to come in that midterm. In 2018, in the United States Senate, only Republicans decided to retire. One of them ended up being replaced by a Democrat. In the House of Representatives, 34 Republicans decided to retire and only 18 Democrats, nearly half. And in terms of the incumbents who retired from public office altogether, more than double the amount of Democrats. 10 Democrats and 23 Republicans who decided ultimately they would never step into politics in 2018 again, or likely in the future. The point is that in 2018, many people retired, and most of them were Republicans. And it told us everything we needed to know about the 2018 midterm elections. And then when you take a look at 2020, you'll see here that many Republicans anticipated Democrats to sweep the nation against President Trump. 3 Republicans retired in the Senate, 1 Democrat, and in the House of Representatives, 26 Republicans decided to retire. 9 Democrats decided to retire. And in terms of those who decided to retire from public office altogether, 5 Democrats and 20 Republicans. And another example on the counter side was in 2014, when in the United States Senate, 5 Democrats decided to retire. If you take a look at the Senate election results, you see what happened. Iowa, Tom Harkin's seat, went to the GOP. South Dakota, Mike Rounds ended up winning there. He won re-election in 2020. Montana, Steve Daines won this race. For a brief period of time, it had 2 Democratic senators. Now, it only has 1, and it was 1 after this election. Steve Daines won re-election in 2020. Didn't win by as large of a margin, but still was able to win by 10 points, by double digits, regardless. Looking at these 5 Republicans, in addition, you also have West Virginia, Jay Rockefeller. Well, that went to Shelley Moore Capito by a very large amount. She won by nearly 30 points, even though a Democrat actually held that seat by the time that election was being held. Point is that in these competitive districts, in these competitive Senate races, Democrats decided to retire. But in the House, I know what you might be thinking. You look at the House of Representatives and you say, well, more Republicans decided to retire than Democrats. But Democrats in some elections only had 9 retirements. In 2022, they have about 9 as well. Looking at 2014, though, there were less than half, the amount of Republicans as Democrats retiring. Essentially 16 Democrats, 25 Republicans. It was pretty close. Many Republicans typically retire for whatever reason, but the point is that Democrats had historically high amounts of retirements in 2014. And 2014 was not necessarily the best year for the Democratic Party. In fact, by the end of these House elections, Democrats only had 188 seats. Today, they have 222. If Democrats thought they were throttled then, I can only imagine how they felt in 2014. Or if Democrats think they are throttled right now with a majority in the House of Representatives. So all around, what we are starting to see here is that these retirements are picking up. And it doesn't matter which side it's on. Right now, the GOP just simply isn't doing better than the Democrats. When it comes down to the Senate, the Democrats will likely do much better than the GOP in terms of open races, in terms of overall retirements. In the House, it could go a different way. But right now, these numerous announcements that are beginning to form with incumbents deciding to run for other office, with incumbents deciding to retire from public office together, as more and more of these reports begin to go, you have to start adding up Democrat versus Republican, Democrat versus Republican. And it's a very good indicator because these people get inside information. They have campaign teams, they have strategists, they have political analysts on their side telling them exactly how their race is going to go and advising them a strict course of action. If their advice is to decide to retire because of the unusual circumstances of the year, because the year doesn't look as beneficial as it might have during a normal midterm election year, whatever the reason is, you need to watch these retirements because they tell you a story. It's like reading the tea leaves, except they provide a very good amount of accuracy for the eventual result in a midterm election. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.